Let's get started. Hey, Anthony, thanks so much for being here.
Sure.
If I may just set the ball rolling, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining from different parts. Yes, some of you, many of you registered. I know that the recording of this webinar will be made available. So thank you so much for registering. Yes, Karat, this is the second in our series of customer webinars. Anthony from FIS Global. We are the first one with SAP with GEC in September. We have more and more of our enterprise users coming out and sharing their journeys. You will hear about in another few days. In January, we have Oracle talking about a developer's perspective and journey with test automation using Karate. We also have confirmation Trivago. Benjamin Bishop from Trivago will be talking about his own experience with Karate. But today, without any further ado, we have Anthony with us. We have had the pleasure of interacting with Anthony now for a year. And Anthony, the best part is, while Karate was released close to 6 years ago by Peter, created and released by Peter close to 6 years ago, Peter and I came together and incorporated Karate exactly a year ago today. So today is our first anniversary of Karate Labs Inc. And thank you for being here with us on an occasion that just thrills us, and of course is just the start. We at Karate Labs are just getting warmed up. Let me take a moment and introduce you to the audience. Anthony has 2 decades of quality assurance experience, and yes, it is frustrating that he doesn't look that old, and we remind him of that very often. But many of those years were spent managing and supervising the efforts of full-time resources, contractors, and third-party vendors on large project implementations. He currently occupies a hybrid role of Scrum Master and Principal Quality Engineer at FIS Global, which is a Fortune 500 company. And he supports a team of 6 software developers and 1 affable product owner. His mornings are spent moving sticky notes around a Kanban board, and his afternoons are spent making sure the microservices his team designs, builds, and supports function properly. His evenings are spent with the 3 wonderful A's in his life, his lovely wife, Ali, and his 2 wonderful kids, Aveline and Amelie. In order to keep pace with his development partners while juggling 2 different roles, Anthony spearheaded the adoption of Karate a few years ago at FIS Global, which since then has been rolled out to large parts of his organization. Anthony, we are thrilled to host you, and thank you for being here. Anthony will share with the audience his details of his journey with Karate and how he fell in love with programming, being a non-programmer. So Anthony, let's get started. Tell us about your journey and what brought you to the world of development and testing, Anthony.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction as well. And thanks for sharing this milestone with me. I didn't realize it's been a year. So congratulations on that. But in terms of how did I end up in a QA role, sort of by accident. Many years ago, I was an intern at Fidelity Investments. I sort of got an internship there by knowing the right guy. My academic advisor was friends with a senior vice president who worked at Fidelity. And I ended up doing a few internships there and eventually becoming a systems analyst in a very small group supporting a telephony system, interactive voice response system. And there weren't any QA engineers on the team. There were systems analysts and developers, and like myself, the systems analysts, we shouldered what would be considered a lot of the QA tasks. So in addition to translating business requirements into systems requirements, I would also be in charge of writing test cases and executing them, doing the bug tracking, all the QA tasks, if you will. And as that team grew up, they decided it really made sense to have a separate small group of quality assurance engineers dedicated to that role rather than having the systems analysts, wear multiple hats. And at that point, I had a knack for it. I really liked testing out software. So I headed in that direction. So a few years down the road after that, automation became there was a big push to automate everything. And there was also a big push to, as they say in the States, offshore everything. So if you wanted to be an individually contributing QA engineer in my organization in the United States, there's sort of 2 paths you could go down to stay relevant. You could become an automation engineer, or you could become what they referred to as an integrated QA lead. And that's the direction I headed in, is, basically these large complex programs, they might have multiple projects underneath them, multiple teams supporting them, multiple applications involved. So a quick example is, somebody picks up the phone, dials 1-800, at that time was Fidelity Investments. So 1-800-Fidelity, there's an IVR involved, there's a call routing team and the routing scripts involved with that. There's a customer profile database off to the side, so we know as much about you as we possibly could. And then you land on an agent's desktop, where that desktop software was largely written in-house. And as you can imagine, there's multiple teams supporting each leg of that end-to-end flow. As an integrated QA lead, I was in charge of, looking at each of those teams, supporting each of those applications and making sure the integration points were being minded to, there weren't any gaps in coverage, basically putting together an overall test plan. And that was going quite well for a while. And when the pandemic hit, I found myself working for a supplier to the food service industry, which is one of the worst places you could probably find yourself during the pandemic. There was just a round after round of layoffs, and I was eventually furloughed for 2 weeks, which turned into 6, which turned into an indefinite period of time. I had 2 kids to support, a family that depended on my income. So I started looking for a similar job, a QA lead role outside of my, at that time, employer. And I was coming up short. The best I could find was the role I have today with FIS. What appealed to me about that is there wasn't too much in the way of software development. So even though it was an automation engineering role, they were really looking for somebody who could read and understand XML, which very simple, and SQL. And the reason behind that is they had an in-house test harness that they used to support, their particular suite of software. And it was pretty intuitive. It's been around forever. And again, it's very particular to FIS, but it's easy to pick up and use, and it's XML driven. Really, if you know XML and SQL, you can get by with it just fine. Now, the problem was 2 weeks after accepting this role, I was told I was moving into a microservice organization where we're replacing a lot of the monolith applications with microservices. And with that, I no longer had this test harness, which was simple and easy to use. I was kind of off on my own to figure out how to become an automation engineer without having had that background. And that's where Karate DSL comes into the mix. So that's a hopefully abbreviated enough version of how I got to where I am today. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. That's brilliant and gives me the segue into the next question. So keeping the tool to one side for a moment, you got into by accident / design into test automation. Okay. And what do you think are the challenges, and what has gone well with test automation? Where do you think the opportunities lie? And more importantly, is there something called an ideal test automation tool or a solution? Because tools are enablers for the role, right? Over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, again, my background up until the last couple of years with test automation was very minimal. I've used tools like Postman and SOAP UI, but I wouldn't call that automation. It was more of plugging in a request, clicking a button, and eyeballing the response that would come back. So any sort of assertions I was doing were using my own eyes. And again, that was going fine for a while. As an integrated QA lead, you didn't really need to be an automation engineer. It was more about the oversight and making sure that the automation engineers who are working on, rolling up their sleeves, actually doing the testing, were doing, covering all the bases. But, finding myself in a position where I needed to be writing the scripts myself, I think, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but if you go back a number of years, everything was manual, and there's obvious drawbacks to that, right? I mean, manual testing it's slow, it's error prone. If a human's doing it or not perfect, you're going to make mistakes. But I think in a way, there was some benefits to it, in the sense that if you were to be a good quality assurance engineer, you really had to know the products that you were supporting. You had to understand not just the technical aspects of it, but the business side. Where's the customer value in this stuff? Where's the risk? and not just technical risk, but, holistically looking at both, again, the business side and the system side, and being able to speak both those languages, being able to prioritize things. How do you do that? Well, based on risk and customer value. So there's a lot more, I think, to a quality assurance role a number of years ago than there were in, I'll call it that gray area, where there was this constant, at least in the organizations I was attached to, there was this drumbeat of just automate everything. And maybe nobody would admit to it being as loosey-goosey as that. But oftentimes it really did roll down to like, oh, so what if we're doing, we're executing 1 million tests every day and a bunch of them are useless. So what? I mean, it's automated, so it takes 5 seconds for this whole suite to run. No big deal. But I think we sort of lost that quality assurance engineering skill set along the way. QA teams started to look for, what do you have as a background? Are you a software developer? Are you comfortable writing Java? And those sorts of questions, they made sense if all you're going to be doing is writing automated scripts all day. But I think by virtue of that, the industry sort of lost that, the customer value, the business aspects that I talked about earlier. So what you see in some of the more modern tools, I think is Karate DSL is a perfect example, is they allow QA engineers to sort of get back to focusing on, I think, the more important aspects of being a QA, understanding where that customer value and the risk is, and making it very easy for you to write a suite of tests without, harassing your development partners for help writing a bunch of code. It allows you to do your job simply and easily and focus on the more important stuff, not just on, being able to crank out a whole bunch of lines of code. So in a very roundabout way to answer your question, I think what Karate DSL in particular allows me to do is focus on the things that are important to me as a QA engineer and not have to worry about my lacking a solid background in, development. And I didn't take very many CS classes in college. And after college, I didn't write a single line of code until, very recently. And that's been just fine, thanks to Karate DSL.
Oh, brilliant. Peter, wouldn't it be fair to state that knowing the journey we have had, and particularly you have had, it's a great summary of one amongst the many reasons that led you to create karate. Anything you would like to add, Peter?
Oh, man. I mean, first of all, I love when you go roundabout, Anthony. And I also want to say that it's amazing. I'm sure a lot of people on the call would just love what you just said about focusing on value, customer value, and kind of prioritizing and not really falling to that trap of automate everything. And then you're just faced with noise and all that. So I just love the way that you navigated that. And I think the good news is that what I'm seeing on LinkedIn and all kinds of discussions nowadays, I think people are realizing this. Maybe it's come a little late in the world or the industry, but I would like to see the, light at the end of the tunnel, where I think people are realizing more. I see more teams starting to talk about, hey, do we need to automate everything, or what do we focus on first, and all that. So I just love how you already talked about that. Coming to your question, Kapil, this is, of course, great to hear as someone who actually just tried to create something that's simple that I would like to use as a developer. And it ended up that what ended up, making things simple for me actually succeeded in making it simpler for most folks, including non-programmers. So it's super helpful, and it's very heartening, of course, Anthony, to get that kind of feedback. And it's not just you, this is something we keep hearing, time and time again. So I think, yeah, Kapil, it was just keep things simple, reduce the noise, reduce the number of things you need to deal with in your head in terms of context. And I think, yeah, karate tries its best to do that. And here we are.
Excellent. Anthony, just building on that, but don't you think the situation's become worse with digital revolution, digital transformation, and smart factory and IoT, that every aspect that you spoke of quality assurance, has the expectation just gone from bad to worse, or do you see things really narrowing down and solutions like karate contributing to that?
bad to worse. And what do you have in mind there, Kapil? I'm just curious.
When you just explained that, quality assurance, quality was just expected to, okay, I've automated everything. Okay. And and with the way the digital transformation mantra has been going around for such a long time, and if anything is just exploding, do you see that software industrialization making this better, improving it, or just things going out of hand?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to go back to what I was saying earlier, I think the whole automate everything, what I would see oftentimes is quality assurance organizations would sort of devolve into, I mean, just to be blunt, they turn into organizations of basically mediocre or worse developers. So they didn't really have any background in QA. They weren't really quality assurance engineers. They're, again, just oftentimes if a software developer was struggling in their previous role, the suggestion would be, well, why don't you try out quality assurance, which means, you're writing automated scripts all day. And again, not to knock on that, but when you have an organization full of people who don't have a background in QA, hiring people who are supposedly QA engineers, things are going to go wrong. And what you oftentimes saw was development organizations and quality assurance organizations sort of butting heads. The development team might be very savvy, and they would find themselves picking up the slack for these QA folks who, they weren't keeping pace. Oftentimes they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't understand the software that they were supporting. They weren't finding the defects, and the development organization was kind of writing the tests and finding the defects for them, and probably scratching their heads wondering, what are these people doing over here if I'm just going to be doing all the work? So in that sense, I mean, if that, that's what I'm calling bad. Has it gone to worse? I don't think so. Again, I think tools like, I'll keep saying it, Karate DSL have allowed the true quality engineers, folks who understand both sides, business and technical, who can sort of speak both those languages, ask the right questions, call out things before a line of code's even written. I mean, if you sort of inject yourself into a project in the early stages when it's being designed, you can call out issues before they even become an issue, right? And in that sense, yes, I think things have gotten a lot better, at least speaking from my own personal experience. If you give the folks who have the capabilities the right tools to use, it can really open up a lot of doors. And that's certainly been my experience. Again, one of the things I lacked heading into the role that I'm in is a development background. And, without a tool like karate, that would have been an unfortunate thing, because I would have struggled to write a whole host of automated tests to support the applications that I do. But again, if it's made easy, if that aspect of your role is made easy, you can focus on all the other stuff, not have to worry about being a software developer in order to become a successful quality assurance engineer.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks. And I'm so glad you put it this way. And after having spent giving up our day jobs, and I'm grateful to Peter for inviting me to this journey. The last 15 months that we have been talking to enterprise users of karate, we just know that in this lifetime, we have a big responsibility to take the power of what Peter created, and of course, contributions from the community across the ecosystem to address just that. So that brings me to the next question. You were pushed over the edge to get into test automation. What led you to find karate, and how do you use karate today?
Yeah, well, I told you, I found myself working for FIS, and 2 weeks into that, instead of having this nice, easy to use test harness where XML and SQL were really the only things you needed to know, not even know in detail, but just a little bit of information and boom, you're off to the races. Well, now I was in this team supporting a bunch of microservices, and I was taking a look at some of the GitHub repos, some of the other squads that I work with, and most of them are using Cucumber. And at first, I'd never heard of Cucumber before, believe it or not. This is 2 or 3 years ago. Somehow I've avoided hearing the term Cucumber until then. I'd never heard of the Gherkin syntax, but I'm looking at these feature files and I'm thinking, oh, this is a piece of cake. And then it occurred to me, well, these feature files aren't really doing anything. And I looked at the glue, if you will, behind them. And a lot of it read like Greek to me. And I'm not fluent in Greek. So you can, I'm thinking, oh boy, I need to become a Java developer in short order, or I'm hosed. And that's when I frantically, literally just Googled. I started Googling like alternatives to Cucumber, and somewhere along the line, I can't remember the exact search terms or any of that, but I did stumble on the Karate DSL repo, and I was taking a look at that, and it made a lot of sense. It was easy to use. Without any background whatsoever in software development, I started using it right away, and I started showcasing it to a couple of my development partners. I'm like, hey, do you think I could use this instead of Cucumber? And, they're like, don't talk to me, talk to the managers. So I did. Got in front of we have a lean stack team here at FIS. They're sort of the gatekeepers. If you want to introduce a new technology, they don't want you just using anything. There's, a process to go through in order to get approval for a new tool. So there was a number of demos involved. I gave my first demo to maybe, 3 or 4 folks, and they were kind of blown away, right? And I found on my calendar within the next couple of weeks, there's 4 or 5 additional meetings where these other folks wanted to see what I was showcasing. And that blew up. There's dozens of folks now who throughout my organization are using Karate. Even folks who were developers or are developers, they were using tools like JGiven or JBehave, which some of the folks in the audience here might be familiar with. But they're also Cucumber style, I would say. Gherkin syntax. It reads like plain English, but again, it's Java based, and the glue behind it. There's a lot of Java code to write in order to get that stuff to work. And with Karate, if nothing else, even if you're a Java developer, very comfortable with writing code, just the lines of code that you save from using Karate as opposed to one of those other solutions, it's kind of a no-brainer. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I found Karate. Google searching and just frantically trying to figure out a way to justify my title and support the microservices that the rest of my development partners are standing up and counting on me to find the bugs with.
Your candor is absolutely refreshing, Anthony. Thank you for that. You're also FIS Global was, if I may recall, the first enterprise customer for our IntelliJ plugin when we released it in June this year. How has that adoption been? Is it across the QA team, developers, both?
Oh, really? So I wasn't aware that we were the first. But no, we certainly
within 10 days of our release, we had individual subscribers, but the first enterprise subscriber.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you most of the folks using it are quality assurance folks like myself. A few of us we have similar stories in that we moved from this one space into the microservice universe and lacked that development background. And, Karate was just, their story is very similar to mine. So when the plugin came out, that's first and foremost, we shopped that around to the QA engineers that I was aware of who were using it. And then the developers on my team and one other team, maybe there's more, I don't know, but I do know a handful of software developers who use the plugin as well. They really, I think the biggest selling point for them was being able to add breakpoints and, walk back through the steps, and nitpicky developer stuff too. Like if you include like a JSON blob somewhere in your request or the response assertion, the plugin, it colors everything beautifully. So you have, your key value pairs colored differently, and developers love that stuff. So yeah, it's been a huge time saver, and I think everyone who's used it on my end at least has enjoyed it. But we use IntelliJ, so I really can't speak to your other plugin. But yeah, thumbs up. No
Thanks for that. In fact, thanks for that. In fact, this morning we did a very big update to the Visual Studio Code extension, and those same features of even being able to import a Postman collection and convert it to a Karate test,
Yeah,
Same for Open API. It's all coming in IntelliJ in the new year.
Yeah, I mean, I think Visual Studio, I mean, I'm not super familiar with it, but I imagine it lends itself more to I was going to say layman, that I'm not trying to be insulting there, but I think folks like myself probably use Visual Studio more than IntelliJ. FIS, we use IntelliJ, so.
And yes, and I don't think anybody will take it in the wrong way. That's what we have seen with the 250 plus enterprise customers we have interacted with in the last 14, 15 months. Most of the QA folks are very comfortable with Visual Studio Code to a large extent, or even Eclipse now. But the hardcore developers we have seen more on the IntelliJ side. So with all of this, Peter and I'll put you on the hot seat, okay? And what we see, and particularly when I was drinking from a fire hose and we were scaling up Karate Labs, forming, learning how we go talk, what's happening in the ecosystem, the one thing that comes across repeatedly, particularly in social media, is that developers and QA professionals are always at odds. And there are enough and more memes out there of developers and testers literally fighting like, dare I say, Tom and Jerry cartoons. Why do you think this is the case?
Is that a question for me or Peter? I'm sorry. I thought you said Peter.
No, it's from us for you.
Oh,
Yeah. And I just want to say, I mean, that whole Tom and Jerry thing is literally a thing on, let's say, LinkedIn. I actually see people, using meme material, Tom and Jerry included. And it's kind of disheartening to me because there's plenty of folks painting this, eternal battle between developers and QA/testers. I wish it wasn't the case, but it seems to be a thing. Yeah. So just wanted to know your take. I'm curious to know, Anthony, I mean, have you faced that kind of a, what do you say, divide within your team? And how do you see yourself, counter this? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have examples of that throughout my career. I've seen it. And every time it's been, at least in my experience, it's been a failure on leadership's part. I sort of touched on this earlier, where you basically, they would never admit this, but when organizations don't take quality assurance seriously, the QA organization tends to not be very good. And what I mean by that is, I talked earlier about the hypothetical example where you have a software developer, he or she is struggling in their role. They're not a very good software developer. If the suggestion is, well, why don't you try out QA? That's an example of, a leadership team not taking quality assurance very seriously. Why would you assume that this failed software developer would be a good quality assurance engineer, unless you think of quality assurance as sort of like development light? And if that's the case, then sure, maybe they'll succeed, but they're not going to succeed in the sense that they're going to be very good at finding defects and ensuring quality in the products that are rolling out to production. They're just not. And then when an organization is filled with folks like that, and the leaders in charge of the organization don't really have a background in QA either, you're going to bring on board more duds, and you're going to end up with an organization that's not very good at its job. And the developers are going to be frustrated by that, and rightly so. But just to counteract that, I've had plenty of experience where, if you prove your worth, if you're a good quality assurance engineer, but you just have an occasional question for a developer, like, hey, I'm struggling to do this thing, whatever, maybe some sort of assertion, and it requires a little bit of code, they're going to be they should be more than happy to help you. Because occasionally they're going to have a question for you. I think, again, if you prove your worth, if you're a valuable quality assurance engineer and you're still getting blowback from your development team, then there's something wrong with them. But in my experience, it's usually been the other way around, unfortunately. And oftentimes because, again, the quality assurance engineers in that organization, they're really not QA engineers. They're just misfits, if you will, who have been thrown into an organization that's kind of viewed as, well, if you look at the pay scale, you compare the QA folks to the developers, the QA folks get paid much less. And it's sort of, without admitting it out loud, the leadership team sort of views QA as development light. So, if that's where you're comfortable with, then sure, you're going to have to deal with the Tom and Jerry sort of thing going on a lot. But I think it works much better when you have the right folks staffed in both those organizations, the development team and the QA team. And when that's the case, I've never really seen people butting heads like Tom and Jerry. I think it's worked out quite nicely, in fact.
So in the case of FIS, is that a exception to the norm? Because, and not putting FIS on the spot here, but ultimately it's you, and you said both developers and QA at FIS use a tool like a solution like Karate. So is it more because of your personal relationship with the development team or the individual developers that there is collaboration on the use of Karate? Or it still has to be, it has to trickle top down from a lean stack team or a central platform engineering team? What do you say to that?
Well, so in my current role, I mean, I guess when I was talking there, there's previous roles of mine. I was part of an organization of 300 plus quality assurance engineers, only QA engineers. And we would support, maybe another 300 to 500 software developers. At FIS, it's not like that at all. You typically have a quality assurance engineer supporting 2 or 3 development pairs, so 4 to 6 development engineers, and then there's a product owner and a product manager, sort of overseeing a book of work. But if you're like me, if you're one guy supporting 4 or 6 developers, then you own quality as the QA engineer, but I mean, you also have to spread the love, so to speak, right? I mean, the developers have to be thinking about testing things out as well, because otherwise there's just no way one person could keep up with 4, let alone 6 developers, keep pace and get things moving along without being a bottleneck. So in that sense, in my current team, we all use Karate. I mean, I use it way more than your average developer, but each of the developers are using it as well. Whether it be writing a net new test case, because I just don't have time to do it, or if there's some existing tests that are broken because of some new thing we introduced, rather than them every single time asking me, hey, Anthony, can you update your scripts? They have the background, the knowledge to go in and do that for me. So yeah, it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship, if you will. And it works out quite nicely. And again, from my standpoint, what Karate's allowed me to do is, without a developer skill set, be able to support a team of developers and write automated tests. And what it's allowed the software developers to do is, without ever having heard of Karate before, just immediately look at a feature file and say, oh yeah, I know exactly what's going on here. I know exactly what Anthony did if I was the one who wrote the test originally. And I know exactly what to do to update it. They don't have to ask any questions of me. Hey, where do I go to fix this? It's just very simple and easy to use. And, by virtue of that, I think everyone's embraced it. Oftentimes, I will, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but, you think of like a Swiss Army knife, right? It's one of those, like, it does a lot of things, and I've oftentimes referred to within FIS as Karate is like the Swiss Army knife of software testing solutions. That's not really fair to Karate, because Swiss Army knives aren't very good at anything, right? Like, who's going to use that little pair of scissors to cut anything? It's sort of like a fun little easy to use gadget that kids have fun like whittling sticks with. But if you wanted to do a serious job, any one of those jobs that the Swiss Army knife can supposedly do, you're not going to use a Swiss Army knife. You're going to use, a professional tool. So Karate kind of, it offers that simplicity, but it also allows you to go really deep in a lot of different facets. And we've talked about testing, but there's Karate's mock capabilities, being able to set up a simulator to simulate a downstream service of yours, plug into that so you don't have to worry about some other development team keeping pace with your own. You can just simulate whatever that service is very quickly and easily using Karate, plug into that and test your own application out that way. Performance testing with the assistance of Gatling. I mean, we can go on, but there's a lot that Karate offers. And, again, the ease of use does not come with by the way, it only does like 3 out of the 10 things on your checklist that you're looking to accomplish. in terms of this particular silo. It goes really deep, and I really can't think of anything that another tool would offer above and beyond karate, that, you know, it does it better and in a more simple fashion than karate does. Maybe something exists, but I'm not aware of it.
Brilliant. Peter, question for you. While
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time going into this detail and appreciating your journey, listening to this must make you so happy. And my question to you is, karate was created by a developer. Knowing the needs of a developer, knowing the needs and the challenges of what QA professionals go through, were you really able to see the future and have that foresight that this would also bring developers and QA together and drive that collaboration?
Honest answer, no. I mean, if you look at the history of karate, it started as this side project that just blew up, took on a life of its own, and I was kind of dragged along with it in a good way. As I said, yeah, it's great to hear this, because let me say this, and maybe subconsciously, or, you know, some of my instinct as someone technical may have had a part to play, but I just, speaking as a developer, right, and stepping into a developer's shoes, I just love what Anthony is able to do with his team, right? He's taken the whole huge load off a developer, and think of developers nowadays, especially, you know, developers are expected to be full stack developers, even responsible for ops and deployment and, you know, monitoring and all that. That's a lot. And I think it's getting, you know, out of hand a little bit nowadays, but that's another story, microservices and all. And if I just imagining how, you know, you could work with someone like Anthony, where, okay, great, I could just focus on, you know, all that full stack stuff and deployment and, you know, Kubernetes and whatnot. And, you know, have someone really care about the customer, the end user, the workflows and the experience, which I need to do as a developer. But you know what? Sometimes there's only so many hours in a day, right? There's a limit to bandwidth and all that. So yes, do I feel happy about what I'm hearing? Absolutely. I mean, it's turned out far, you know, better than I had ever expected. So it's always great to get this feedback. So yeah.
Wonderful. Most of the success stories out there started with a certain vision, but ultimately what makes them who they are is something they could not envisage. So it's really heartening to hear this, and thanks so much, Peter, for creating what you've created along with the community. So Anthony, I'm just conscious I want to throw the floor open for questions also and to make it interactive. If you wanted to see karate do something better or something more, what would that be?
Something more. Well, so I can't speak to, you know, we started to get into, it does more than just API testing. There's performance testing, there's mocks, but there's also the UI and the desktop components, you know, similar to Selenium or Robot. That's something I'm just not super familiar with. So I suppose one of the things, a couple of the things that I had in the back of my mind, I wouldn't even classify this as, you know, this is something karate could do better. But I do know a lot of folks I work with, their go-to when they're doing like a quick product demonstration, they always use Postman or something similar, where there's, you know, it's a standalone application. You plug in, usually it's a JSON request body, add a few headers, click a button, then you can see the response come back. I thought if you guys could create some very bare bones UI that does that, and then sort of off to the side behind the scenes puts together a feature file for you as you're doing that. I think that would be a nifty little way to entice a few more people to take a look at it. Because I think what you'd find is that off to the side, again, this feature file being written as they plug in, okay, here's my request body, here are the headers I want, here's my endpoint. They'd be looking at that feature file saying, oh, I don't even need this UI. I could just do this myself over here, you know, and forget the UI. So I thought that would be a nifty little way to get some more folks interested in karate And also, I guarantee you, a lot of the same folks that I have in mind who every time they go to give a presentation use Postman, they'd probably use karate instead. It could be very, very bare bones. That's one thing. The other thing I had in mind is, I oftentimes, if I'm trying to if there's some glue that I need to write, which, karate doesn't completely eliminate the need for writing glue. Oftentimes it comes into play. A good place I usually start is Stack Overflow, or even just like a Google search. And it's usually pretty quick and easy to find at least a template for like, all right, I know what I need to do. Here's a couple of examples I came across in GitHub or wherever. It'd be nice if there was some sort of standalone glue repo, if you will, where there'd be just, a handful of things that folks from the community could add to over the years of, hey, if you're looking to do X, Y, and Z, well, here's a few ways that I've done it. And, again, for folks like myself, where you're not a Java developer, it saves a ton of time if you have, something very similar to what you are looking to accomplish. You just need to tweak a few things here or there. That's a huge time saver over me having to bug one of my development partners to help me out writing a few methods to get things done. So that's, what could you do better? I don't know if those would be classified as things you could do better. They're more of just simple suggestions that I had in the back of my mind, but for what it's worth, there they are.
Wow. Peter, anything you like?
No, I think these are great suggestions, and I've thought about them a little bit in the past. The whole no code thing will certainly, I completely agree, it's really going to be impactful for a lot more folks, and even our existing folks, especially those who want to get into API testing and feel that API testing is this, very technical thing. That's actually not the case. And I have this separate rant on, I think API testing is far simpler than UI automation. And I notice you don't do much UI automation, and you're purely backend, and you're using the mocks and all that, Anthony. So brilliant. And yes, I think as we evolved, we're starting to see a lot of teams need, database connectivity, Kafka stuff, all the glue utilities that you talked about. So yes, I think we're going to do some thinking over that, and let's see what we come up with. Yeah, but I like these suggestions, and we'll take them very, very seriously, actually, coming from a power user of karate like yourself, Anthony.
Yeah, no, I guess one of the things I had in mind, I think we say was it Das? I can't remember. I keep forgetting his name, who put together the Kafka consumer. And, the Kafka consumer and producer. I mean, it's a sample project. It's out there on GitHub. Anyone can access it. And actually, my team, we've used that as the foundation, if you will, for putting together a couple of Kafka producers and consumers of our own. It was a big time saver. And it's not karate specific, but it can be, right? There's definitely a tie in there. And DOS had the feature files to go with the Java code, showing you exactly how to stand up a producer and a consumer and use it in your tests. So, Kafka is a big thing. AWS, plugging into DynamoDB, just if there was like a handful of starter, how to do this thing that a lot of people are doing glue wise, I thought that would be a benefit. And I don't think you guys need to drive it. I'm thinking, if I were in your position, I would want a repo that, you would act as sort of a gatekeeper, sort of, like the Google Play Store. I don't want just anyone dumping a bunch of garbage in there. But if it's something that the community gave a thumbs up to, and a lot of people thought, oh yeah, this looks good, then by all means, throw it in the repo, and then it's there for anyone else to use.
Oh, brilliant.
I don't want to say, I'm so glad you mentioned Das, because Das and I were in touch when he actually submitted that particular example. He'll be so happy to hear that it's been useful to your team. So thanks for that shout out. And Das, I'll make you watch this video later. I don't see him on the call, but he'll be tremendously happy to hear this. So
we might give him a t-shirt also this time, Peter.
Finally, I know I'm 1 year late.
Hey, this has been brilliant, Anthony. Last two questions. One, what message would you want to convey to the software testing community and professionals?
Well, I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. I think for me, what it means to be a quality assurance engineer, it's not about, your software development skills at all. It's more about just having a knack for understanding where the customer value and the risk inherent in the applications that your team's building and supporting, where that is, injecting yourself in the conversation early, finding defects before the software is even written. So yeah, my message to the QA community would be, don't be that watered down developer who is constantly getting in a Tom and Jerry type fight with your development partners. Don't be that guy. Prove your value otherwise, and leverage tools like Karate DSL to pick up the slack where if you don't have that background in software engineering, let the tool do the work for you. It's very easy to use. And if that concern is taken off your plate, you no longer have to worry about, I'm not really a Java developer. How am I going to support this? How am I going to write these automated tests? Well, if you don't have to worry about that anymore, you can really focus on, again, I think the customer value, the technical risk, the test complexity, that sort of thing that's inherent in everything you do. That's my message. Be a real quality assurance engineer, not just a watered down developer.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we should use that. In our subsequent interactions. Anthony, thanks so much for continuing to be a guide. When Peter created karate, our tagline for karate is test automation made simple. What you said are simple recommendations are the powerful ones. And so we certainly take it very much on board. In fact, we were talking to a gentleman in a retail company in Bulgaria yesterday who made a similar recommendation with regard to the glue code that you spoke of. And in fact, he's commented on the chat also. And Lubo, we hear you. You are absolutely right. I think that's the last mile and last barrier we need to address. Anthony, final question before we throw the floor open for questions. What do you do in your free time? What mischief do you get to in your free time?
I don't have any free time anymore. I got 2 kids and this full-time job and a wife. I mean, I used to play a lot of guitar. I don't play it very much anymore. I would say in my free time now, it's all about the kids. I find myself at, hanging out at the park all day Saturday, going fishing. The older one likes to fish.
Nice.
So yeah, it's very, very kid centric for me these days. I'm sure a lot of folks can
relate to
that.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. On behalf of Peter and myself, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before I thank you once again, let's take a moment. Please feel free. Let me know. Raise your hand. I can unmute the participants. Questions for Anthony. Anybody, if you raise your hand, I can even try and unmute you. I know he's a very convincing speaker, so feel free to ask him questions. Okay, I'll throw one in while we wait for the audience.
I've answered all the questions already, Kapil.
Where do you see your own future in the world of quality assurance? Where do you see, if we were having this call, say 5 years from now, what would Anthony Staffier be doing? Would he be on the other side of the table with a software and a solution provider? Would you continue to be that leader top down who is ensuring that the developers and QA folks work collaboratively? Where do you see yourself?
Well, what you just said there, I mean, I would love the opportunity to put together a proper quality assurance organization, where, again, the managers on the team have a background in it. They're not, oftentimes organizations I've worked with, which are supposedly QA organizations, the entire management team, they've never been a quality assurance engineer. They are usually software developers or maybe from the business side. And the folks from the business side are typically better. Software developers, it's not a knock on software developers, but they'll be the first ones to admit, I don't think like a QA engineer, and that's fine. But if you admit that, then what are you doing in charge of a team of quality assurance engineers? How are you the best suited person to, hire the right folks? Sometimes, it works out because some folks are just all-stars. You could put them in just about any role and they'll do well. But I would like to be the guy putting together that software quality assurance organization, and a team full of folks who someday any one of them could replace me when I retire, and it's their turn to do the same. Mentoring is another thing I've always enjoyed. Anytime there's a junior employee coming along, because QA is software development. You can study computer science in college, learn Java, C++, whatever. There's a lot of tools out there to make you a better developer, but I don't think there's any college major called quality assurance. So it's something that you just have to have a knack for and sort of pick up as along the way. And certain folks are good at it, certain folks aren't, but what it certainly does, it certainly helps to have a mentor who's been doing it for a while. And if you have a knack for it, you're looking to make that next step up in your career, having that person to tap on the shoulder and ask questions of, it's invaluable. And I like to be that person. I've had people like that in my own career, and I like to pay it forward. So there you go.
Excellent. And we wish you the very best, and we look forward to making our humble contributions along the way in that journey. There's a question from Kyle Simmons. What type or method of testing do you think most often gets overlooked or not even addressed?
Method of testing.
And Peter, you also feel free to jump in.
What type of testing? Yeah.
I was going to say, in my experience, I don't know if you call it a type of testing or performance testing. It seems like that should be done a lot earlier than it typically is. It's usually the last thing that people check off. And oftentimes I've actually been involved in times where performance testing has yielded really poor results, and we just move forward anyways. Like, oh, well, let's hope for the best. We'll fix it, after the first release. So yeah, I would say the most neglected, in my experience, the most neglected form of testing is performance testing. It's always the can's kicked down the road until the end, and people don't even really pay much attention to the results when they probably should be.
Excellent. Kyle, I have enabled you to unmute yourself. Does that answer your question, or would you like to ask a follow-on question, Kyle?
Especially with API testing, because it's okay, we sent one request, but say if I sent 10 requests in a row to an integration and 3 of them come back failing, it's we have a little bit of flakiness here,
Well, that's a lot of flakiness.
Sometimes we do.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think, play devil's advocate, I think with a lot of things being in the cloud these days, and just, everything's so cheap by virtue of that. A lot of times poor performance results, all things being equal, you're going to say, well, this application that used to handle 200 TPS, I made it so it can handle 250. People are going to be happy about that. But if it goes from 200 to 150, I think in the back of a lot of people's minds is, well, if the traffic ramps up, we'll just, spin up a second pod and we'll be able to handle it. And that's not going to cost us too much in the way of, additional fees for that, day or however long that traffic was elevated. So yeah, I think things like that have allowed us to get a little sloppy with performance standards, but I would like to see more performance testing taking place early. But again, in my experience, it's been, okay, we're done developing, quote unquote, done developing. Now let's performance test it. And I think we probably should have tested things out earlier along the way before everything, all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed.
Brilliant. Kyle was feeling terrible. He lost his audio as you were answering. So I told him, not a problem. The recording will be there. So
sure.
Anthony, if the audience wants to get in touch with you without you sharing your PIN code and your address, what is the best way for them to reach out to you, man? I'm
on LinkedIn, and yeah, I mean, I would start there. And if they're part of the karate Slack community, I'm certainly there as well.
Look for Dale, and you'll find him on the Slack community.
That's
there.
true.
Yes.
So yeah, the catch there is the karate Slack community. I'm Dale Burncock.
Yes, it took us. He was a covert agent, and a year ago when we found him is when we realized he's actually not.
Who
Dale.
is this guy?
Who is this guy? No, it's
Anthony,
brilliant.
who are you?
Any other questions from the audience? If not, we can close on time. I'll just pause for literally a few seconds. But yes, reach out to Anthony on LinkedIn, or if you're on Slack. And if anything for us, by all means, like I said, please keep sharing with us. This is just the start of customer journey webinars. We are learning from our enterprise users as we scale the adoption of karate. Many of the enterprises like FIS, who are the users of our official plugins, we are taking their feedback, adding more features. So there's more to come. So please stay tuned in, and thank you all so much for joining. Thanks, Peter, for giving the community and the professionals your wonderful creation of karate, and to all our contributors who have contributed to karate, including what has come out in the recent release 1.3.0. And Anthony, keep challenging us, keep giving us those simple and powerful ideas, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, Anthony.